Evening to everybody in our web audience. Welcome to everybody who's here in the new digs for the Arab Gulf States Institute in a new address in Washington, D.C. I'm Doug Silliman, president of the Arab Gulf States Institute, and I am thrilled today to bring you what I think will be an excellent discussion of a very present topic. President Trump is starting today, or is finishing today, his third day in the Gulf. He's had very successful win-win scenarios in Riyadh, in Doha, and now I presume at the end of the day will be in Abu Dhabi as well.
Yeah.
He's been focusing on potential economic benefits of the relationship between the United States and the Gulf, and that is a way that has made this a much easier topic to sell politically on both sides. It has not, however, ignored security issues. There are military sales contracts, there are a lot of other business deals, in addition to all of the talk about artificial intelligence and the selling of chips to the Gulf. We are going to have, I think, a really good discussion today. Before we introduce the speakers, I just want to go through some of the ground rules. This conversation is on the record. It will be recorded and will be available on our website, agsi.org, in a day or two. Those of you who want to ask questions here in the live audience, please just raise your hand and we will recognize you to ask your question. Those of you on the web audience, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will feed your questions into the moderator as appropriate as they come in. What really thrills me is we've got two great speakers today who have deep knowledge of the Gulf, the politics, economics, and what is going on right now. First of all, I want to welcome Dr. Greg Gause, Professor Emeritus of the George Bush School of Government and Public Service, and now a visiting
at Texas A&M
University. I'm sorry, as a Baylor grad, I had trouble saying that.
Gig of Maggie's.
He also happens to be one of the members of the board of directors of this institution as well. So we have a great relationship and great respect for his ability to take on difficult topics. So Greg, thank you for joining us today. The moderator for this conversation is one of our own senior resident scholars, Hussein Ibish, who has been here with us at AGSI for about 10 years, but again, has a deep understanding of the politics of the region and how the interaction is. So Hussein, I will turn this over to you to begin the conversation.
Well, thanks, boss. I appreciate it. Doug runs the show here, so it's really nice to be introduced by him. Welcome, everybody in the room and everybody online. This is going to be another and a particularly excellent AGSIW webinar on a very timely matter, which is a hot take on Trump's 3 days in the Gulf region, visiting Saudi Arabia again as his first major diplomatic trip of his second presidency, reenacting what he did in 2017 when Saudi Arabia was his first stop. I think the visit to Pope Francis's funeral, he doesn't really count. There were no deliverables, no prep. It wasn't a major diplomatic initiative. It was a funeral. And this time, though, he's added the UAE and Qatar, making the trip broader, more ambitious, bigger in scope, and just more intensive in every way. So we're incredibly delighted to have with us, sitting to my left, and probably a lot of you sitting to my right, but Dr. Gregory Gause. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be with him, because in the field in which I'm a practitioner of studying the relationship between the U.S. and the Gulf countries, he's the best there is. He's the greatest living scholar of that topic, I think, hands down. And so I look to him for guidance, and now we're going to have that enacted in real time. So let me thank you very much for being with us. I'm
Always a pleasure to see you.
Really honored by this. The second matter of business is to begin the conversation. And we'll bring in the audience later on. You can ask questions via the Q&A function, correct? Yes. And also, of course, in the room in person. And I'll let you know when we get there. I want to begin by asking Dr. Gause, Greg, if I may, what surprised you about this trip? I think a lot of us knew it was set up very carefully to be win-win-win scenario, bonhomie and goodwill to men, and a happy place. He wanted to go to his happy place, and he needed it, given the state of the presidency at the moment, embattled and with pushback and retreats on all sides. This is one place where he could go and maybe encounter no pitfalls. What surprised you, if anything?
So I think the most surprising thing to me is the AI stuff.
Yeah.
In that the Biden administration was very careful in terms of dealing on AI with any third party, particularly third parties that were heavily involved economically with Chinese firms and the Chinese government and Chinese interests. It seems that for the Trump administration, the economics are foremost, and the sale of the chips to Saudi and Emirati concerns is something that I think in a Biden administration, if a second Biden administration or Harris administration would have taken months and months and months if they were going to be approved at all. And so I think that it kind of signals a change in how the United States is going to view international trade that involves AI elements. It's going to be less governed by security and fear of intellectual property transfer issues, and more by the sheer economics of it. That to me was probably the biggest surprise. The second one was, and as you said, it was set up, so I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but still, the fact that strategic issues, which have been the dominant element of most American-Saudi interactions over the decades, have really been submerged. I think that future of relations with Iran, which the president talked about, but we still don't know where this administration is going on Iran. I think we know exactly where the president would like to go.
Yeah.
Right? But we really don't know if how long his patience will last in terms of these negotiations with the Iranians. We know the Iranians like to drag these things out.
Yeah.
Right. And we know that the president is very interested in quick wins. And so even though right now the administration and the Gulf states are kind of on the same page in that it's time to engage Iran, confrontation, particularly military confrontation, is not something that the Gulf states want, and it's certainly not something that the president is advocating right now. But he holds it out there. He holds it out there, and we could reconvene here in a month, and the atmosphere between the Trump administration and Iran could be very different. And that would present really serious issues for the Gulf states. And so I think that the fact that I assume they're talking about this, quietly and not in public, but the fact that Iran, Gaza, China, right, are not top of the agenda items on this trip is, as you say, I shouldn't be surprised because that's the way the trip was set up, but it's still a little bit surprising.
What else was elided in the interests of bonhomie and maximum goodwill to men?
Maximum goodwill to men, the motto of the Trump administration. I think that what else was elided?
Yeah,
I think.
Can you say more about the eliding of these potential irritants?
Right. So I think that there's a long-term problem for the Gulf states in the kind of world economy that one can extrapolate from President Trump's policies. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, other Gulf states have all basically established their own visions for what their post-oil economy is going to look like. And those visions are built on an assumption of a world economy in which investment, trade, and people move freely across borders.
Yeah.
This is, I think, the core element of the UAE's strength over the decades.
Especially Dubai's model.
And
right?
the Dubai model,
Right.
exactly. And it is the model, obviously, of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030.
Yeah.
And and this is a big if, because we don't know where the Trump administration will eventually end up on this policy of tariffs, this policy of if you will, moving away from the neoliberal model of a relatively free trade environment in the world. We don't know where that's going to end up, but if it ends up at a place that discourages globalization, that tries to roll back the economic exchange, relatively free economic exchange of not only goods but also services and investment around the world, that's going to be a real long-term blow to the long-term economic plans of the Gulf countries.
They might have to rethink everything.
Right. And also the immediate issue of oil prices. Right?
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Because of course it might be plans for a post-oil world, but it's going to be funded by oil, by oil revenues, and we know the immediate impact of this change in American policy has been to drive down oil prices out of fear that global economic activity is going to shrink.
So oil pricing, which Saudi Arabia has attempted to create a floor and a ceiling for in cooperation with Russia through the OPEC Plus mechanism, was very nearly the source of a major crisis between Saudi Arabia and the United States under Biden.
Right.
There was this, blow up, which then fizzled out when oil prices did not go up. And Saudi Arabia proved to be correct in saying that there was nothing to worry about. But if they had, then the anger that had built in the Biden administration might have poured over. And then that was in the early fall of, I can't remember which year, but it doesn't really matter.
23,
I think so. And then in January of 24, you had a kind of miniature repeat of that, where again, the disaster didn't happen. But it's entirely possible that sometime in the next 3.5 years, there will be a spike in oil pricing, and Washington, Trump will turn to Saudi Arabia and say, turn the faucet to the left and lower production. And Saudi Arabia will then be put in a position of pleasing him or defying him, basically. So where do you think this trip leaves us? In that, I would be surprised if that didn't happen at some point. It's so hardwired into reality that, do you see any way it couldn't happen? And assuming it does, where does this trip leave us regarding how that's managed between the two countries, and especially the role of Trump as an individual who takes everything personally? Right?
Yeah, he takes everything personally. I think that I was wrong. It's 22. I think when that first blow up between Biden and the Biden administration and Saudi. But the Saudis in the OPEC Plus framework, right before Trump's visit, announced an unwinding of some of the cutbacks and to put over 400,000 barrels back on the market immediately with thoughts of further unwinding the past cuts that we were talking about that led to this little blow up with the Biden administration. I don't think that was primarily directed at the Trump administration, even though the timing was good and that oil prices have gone down.
Yeah.
I think it was aimed largely at OPEC Plus discipline. And as the Saudis have done on frequent occasions in the past, both within OPEC and OPEC Plus, every once in a while, when the cheating on quotas gets a little too bad, the Saudis say, we're not going to give up market share to you guys. See how you like this.
Right.
And the Saudis always believe that they can last longer than anyone else in the organization.
They sort of proved it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they proved it from the mid '80s.
In the confrontation with Russia,
and in Russia in 2020,
exactly,
with when the COVID collapse of the market and and even before that in 2014, 2015,
Right.
when OPEC Plus got formed. So I think that what the Saudis have done is kind of killing two birds with one stone, right? Attempting to reestablishing, if you will, deterrence within OPEC Plus, but also using the timing to, as a side benefit, giving a quote unquote gift to President Trump in terms of his desire to see lower oil prices. Now, there's a third category in here of player, right? Yeah. And that is the American shale market.
That's it.
The biggest revolution that we've seen in the oil markets, really, I think, since the 1970s, and the enormous shift in prices and in power in the world oil market. The second biggest change has been this revolution in American production. Right, brought on by technological innovation, which really hasn't been implemented anywhere else in the world.
Yeah,
people aren't fracking. Yeah. People aren't fracking anywhere else. They're fracking here. Yeah. Right. My neighbors in Texas were fracking, and you could tell when I would drive around whether the price of oil was high or low by how many of those pumps were working. Yeah. So I think that the third target of Saudi Arabia's opening up the spigots a bit is the shale oil production in the U.S. Right? One of the great questions is, at what point does shale become uneconomical in the U.S.? The problem is that there's no one number for that. It differs from based on geological configurations, which I don't understand, to all sorts of other economic and service provision factors, right? Up in North Dakota, maybe it is $60 a barrel. Yeah. My neighbors in Texas could produce and did produce oil from fracked wells at $30 a barrel, and still made a profit. Sure. But I think to the extent that oil prices go down below 60, right, you might not see American production reduced, but you might not see as much investment going forward in sustaining the American production levels. And that a year or a year and a half from now could actually help Saudi Arabia and in a firming up of the market. So I think that Saudi oil policy is always got multiple goals at any one time. And I always would argue against the idea that Saudi oil policy is done to please an American president.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Also, in the crises with the Biden administration, the war between Russia and Ukraine was one of its most ferocious passages, and Democrats on the Hill, in particularly, especially in the Senate, viewed the oil pricing issue through the lens of a supposed Saudi cooperation with Moscow against Kiev, even though that was the furthest thing, really, from Saudi calculations. That's how it was interpreted. So I'll just throw that out there. Let me.
I actually think that they had even more nefarious scenarios in their minds.
Yeah.
Because this was in the lead up to the midterm elections.
Oh, well, yes, that's true as well. Good point. In the first administration of Donald Trump, we saw, we heard, I should say, incessant refrain of energy dominance. It was one of the biggest buzzwords or buzz phrases of the first Trump term. And people argued over what it meant and whether it was realistic or not and what on earth this policy might be. We don't hear about that anymore. Why? And what impact does that have on Saudi?
Yeah, I don't think that the Trump folks have given it up, right? I mean, they might not say energy dominance as much, but they do say drill, baby, drill all the time.
They do.
And so there is I think, a tension in this desire of the administration to basically say, we are the dominant energy producer in the world, which the United States is, right? And as a result of that, we're the best place for you to set up your business, right? We're the best place for you to to invest in AI, which will require enormous amounts of energy. America can provide that energy. So there's a tension there with the OPEC plus countries and with the Gulf countries, but it's not a problem that can be solved. It's just a situation that has to be managed.
Yeah.
In that there are fundamental interests of oil producers that run counter to the Trump administration's drill baby drill, and there are tensions even within the United States on that, right?
Sure.
The lower the price we have, the less profitable it is for oil investors and oil producers here in the United States to produce. So the Trump administration, I think, in its more sophisticated moments, realizes that and is going to walk that line.
Yeah. Let's talk about another potential pitfall that was avoided in this sort of explosion of brotherly love that we've seen with real things, and it's not entirely fictional.
Right. Real things and some exaggeration.
Yeah, but precisely that. Let's talk about some other things that are lurking, sort of liminally and under the surface area. Probably safe to say that Saudi Arabia is satisfied with the Trump administration's policy on Yemen, but Israel isn't. And there is a divide between Israel and the United States, or maybe you could say Trump and Netanyahu, on a whole range of issues, including the Gaza war, including the U.S. deal with the Houthis, that the Houthis went to great lengths to say and demonstrate did not include Israel, and that took the Israelis by surprise. The unilateral, or I shouldn't say unilateral, but the bilateral negotiations with Hamas to secure the release of Edom Alexander, the last remaining U.S. dual citizen in Gaza, was also done without Israeli input and cooperation. And there are a number of other, examples of this. The most prominent and sort of how should I put this, potentially explosive issue is the negotiations with Iran, where both sides are increasingly clear they're keen on a deal. I think that was obvious even before Trump won in last November, that Washington and Tehran were getting ready to compromise again in the mutual interests of both parties. It's become clear, I think, that could well happen under Donald Trump. And Israel is very, very unhappy about that prospect. So what about Trump's relationship with Israel? Though it's protected by strong domestic political constituencies, including the evangelical Christian base, which is very close to Donald Trump, and it's a major part of the foundation of the coalition that brought him to the White House both times, but also the Jewish right and others who militate in favor of Israel sort of unconditionally in the United States. How do you view Trump and Israel in the context of this trip, in which some people saw the lack of inclusion of Israel on the agenda as a slight? I don't think that's right. I don't see why it should be the case. But in reality, there are all these issues that in which daylight is glaringly obvious, blindingly obvious. And I think it's kind of remarkable that at this point, you'd be hard-pressed, I am hard-pressed, to identify major issues in which there is presently a major dispute between Trump's policies and Saudi Arabia's policies. But it's so easy to do that off the top of your head with Israel. Yeah. This is highly unusual. So what about U.S.-Israel relations in light of that highly odd reality or divergent reality?
Right. And another thing, it's not just Yemen, and it's not just Iran. I think one of the surprises I might have mentioned is Syria.
Yeah,
and
we'll get to
the lifting
Syria
of sanctions
entirely
on Syria, which the Israelis don't like.
And we'll talk about that as a standalone issue, but you're absolutely right. It falls within this category. Yeah.
So I think a lot depends on how you're absolutely right. There's clearly tensions. And you're absolutely right. I was asked yesterday by someone, what are the chances of a major split between the Trump administration and Israel? And I said 0%.
Yeah.
But there are clearly tensions.
Right.
The question is, what do they lead to in American policy? Because they could go one of two ways.
Sure.
You know, the classic way is an American president then starts to put pressure on Israel to do what, to get the Israelis to do what Washington wants.
Right.
But the other way this could go is just basically to say, we don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Do what you want.
Right. Do what you want. And I don't think that would be seen by the current Israeli government as such a bad situation.
That would be okay.
It'd be okay for them.
Sure.
They would rather have the Americans, completely in their corner. But if Washington basically does not put the pressure on them to end the offensive in Gaza, to end the efforts to destabilize the new government in Syria, to come to some agreement with Lebanon that would lead to the withdrawal of Israeli troops. If Washington doesn't push the Israelis that way, I think that's an equilibrium they can live with. And I don't have a good sense of where Washington goes on this.
Yeah.
My guess, if I had to guess right now, is that President Trump is not going to get a lot of pressure in the Gulf on these issues. Yeah. Yes, I believe Gulf leaders will talk to him about Gaza, will talk to him about the difficulties that the Israeli offensive in Gaza, the current one, and as part of the overall Gaza war policy, it gives them problems, the Gulf states. But I kind of don't see them making that a major issue in the bilateral relationship with President Trump. So I think a lot of this is going to depend on how President Trump, who as I mentioned before, likes quick wins.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons that he's upset with Prime Minister Netanyahu is he was looking for quick wins in Gaza and didn't get them.
Yeah.
So if I had to guess, I guess he kind of walks away.
Yeah.
Because that leaves his political base, which is very committed to Israel on ideological and even religious grounds. Right. That leaves them with little to criticize because he's not publicly putting pressure on Israel. But he's walking away from something he doesn't see a quick win in.
What if he does succeed in getting an agreement with Iran? Israel would be greatly unhappy with that under almost any circumstances.
Yep.
How would that play out, do you think, is likely? What are things set up at this point to yield in that regard?
I don't think the Israelis can do much. I think that's just something that, it's going to be an eat your peas situation. You might not like it, but you have to eat your vegetables. And it will not be like the JCPOA, where Prime Minister Netanyahu put on a full court press.
He can't do that to Trump.
He can't do that to Trump because he just doesn't have the Republican Party to support him the way he did in the Obama administration.
Yeah.
So he can't engage in that kind of direct intervention in American politics. I mean, what could the Israelis do to try to frustrate what might be seen as the beginning of some rapprochement between Tehran and Washington? They could play games, right? They could, things could blow up in various places.
Yeah.
But I think that there's not much they could do, given the fact that they wouldn't have the entree into American politics to try to push against.
It was sort of demonstrated in 2016 when they tried to sabotage Obama's deal with Iran, that they, even with the support of Gulf countries and others who didn't like it,
and most of the Republican Party,
they couldn't stop it.
Right.
And they're hardly going to be able to stop Trump if they couldn't stop Obama. They probably would not be brave enough to start attacking Iran in an effort to drag Trump into a war that he didn't want. I mean, I just don't see them as having the sheer audacity to do that. But that brings us to a question that Trump made much of in his trip, and he handled it delicately, really, which is the prospect of Saudi normalization with Israel, which was a major goal of the Biden administration and also is a major goal of the Trump administration. And in his final long winding speech that he gave, he said, you'll do it, but you'll do it in your own way and at a time and manner of your choosing, basically. And that's okay for Saudi Arabia. But where does this leave us with the prospect of, the Abraham Accord really, really proof, the real proof of concept there would be Saudi Arabia joining. The Middle Eastern strategic map is not radically redrawn by Bahrain and the UAE normalizing relations with Israel and having a cooperative relationship. It would be in a dramatic way, I believe. Some argue not, but most people correctly think that it would be if Saudi Arabia and Israel formed a partnership. So where is that at the moment? And how do you see that playing out for the rest of this final Trump term?
I think it's on hold, and I think it's going to be on hold for the entire Trump term.
Yeah.
Because the ante got raised for the Saudis on October 7th, or maybe better put October 8th.
Exactly.
What had clearly been a push in the Biden administration to get this triangular deal, right? Saudi American defense treaty and American support for the development of the Saudi nuclear infrastructure, Saudi Israeli normalization, and then Israeli support in American politics for these new things with Saudi Arabia. That triangle got broken on October 7th, October 8th. The Saudis, before the Gaza war started, I think were willing to accept, I don't know if I want to say a fig leaf, but they're willing to accept relatively minor changes in Israeli policy toward the Palestinian question, with the hopes that that could then be developed into a more a serious negotiation that could lead to a back in this period, what was called the kind of a pathway to a Palestinian state, right? Saudi policy has been very clear during the Gaza war, right? Palestinian state, right? Got to have a very short timeline to a Palestinian state for Saudi Arabia to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. The trends in Israeli politics are such that I don't see an Israeli government in the next 4 years being willing to commit to a short timeline to a Palestinian state, even if the highly unlikely goal of the complete elimination of Hamas as a political influence in the Palestinian community is achieved. I don't think that can be achieved. And even if it were, I don't think you'd find an Israeli government that would be willing to say, all right, now we can engage in a serious process of establishing a Palestinian state. And so I think that it's on hold.
Right.
I think that that dream is on hold.
My own assessment is that the least the Saudis could accept is an Israeli recognition of the Palestinian right to a state in mandatory Palestine between the river and the sea, and some sort of pathway to achieving that without a firm timeline and leaving a lot up to the parties. I agree with you. I can't imagine in the Israeli government under current circumstances, even a government of the center left agreeing to that. They just are not prepared to do it. And so Saudi Arabia, I think, is not going to get the minimum. And I'm kind of going to the absolute bottom of the barrel on what Saudi Arabia might be willing to take. I'm exercising imagination in kind of imagining what the absolute minimum they could accept would be. And that's so far from what Israel might be willing to give today that it really is impossible. Yeah.
So then the question becomes, what happens to the Trump administration's desire to move forward on a defense treaty.
Right.
Does it have that desire to move forward on a defense treaty, or is it, in light of its more isolationist elements, kind of less willing to actually give a defense treaty commitment to Saudi Arabia? And even if they did give that defense treaty commitment, could it get through? Could it get 67 votes in the Senate? My guess is no.
Yeah.
Perhaps the more immediate question is the nuclear infrastructure. Right? Because if I understand American law correctly, any kind of American sale of nuclear technology, nuclear equipment, those kinds of things requires a majority vote in both houses of Congress. The Saudis have made it clear that they're even though they're willing to accept the additional protocol to the non-proliferation treaty, they're not willing to accept the 1, 2, 3 formula, which the UAE did, which basically says you can't enrich, and you can't export, right? And the Saudis, have uranium.
Well,
they would like to export it. They see that as an economic benefit for themselves, and they've made it clear that they're not going to accept the 1, 2, 3 agreement limitations. Well, my guess is that now we're guessing, right? But my guess is the Trump administration is going to want to push forward with that deal because they like deals. Right. This is a deal that would be very profitable for American companies, and the Trump administration argument will be, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to sell the Saudis this equipment, which I think is true. Could you get this kind of deal through Congress on simple majority votes? That would be a cliffhanger, I think.
So one of the, I think what's shaping up potentially as a Trumpian effort around this conundrum is to create a new formula bespoke for Saudi Arabia and call it 1, 2, 3, even though it isn't 1, 2, 3 in the conventional reading of the terms. That would be a very Trumpian approach. Whether that can get through Congress or not is a big question. I don't know. That's my guess anyway. So I'm just throwing my 2 cents in. That would be the style of the Trump administration. One thing we haven't talked about yet, and I want to bring in Q&A shortly, so we'll leave the Syria question aside for a second because there isn't that much to be said about it. But one thing that really needs acknowledgement is that the economic agenda Trump went with was both national in terms of weapons sales, investments, semiconductor chips, et cetera. There are all these business ventures that involve his private family business that is run by his 2 sons. You're talking about Trump Towers in Jeddah, Riyadh, and Dubai, a golf course and resort in Qatar, and a huge cryptocurrency deal, which is involving UAE interests to the tune of $2 billion, and probably Saudi and other ones as well. This is extraordinary. And it really has required a suspension of the normal understandings of conflict of interest and the emoluments clause and other aspects of law limiting self-dealing and that kind of behavior. It's really extraordinary. We've never seen anything like it in the United States. I don't know what can possibly be done about it, since the Justice Department will not investigate its own president, certainly not this Justice Department. Congress, dominated by Republicans, is not interested in investigating it. And the Supreme Court has already given sitting presidents, with I think anticipating Trump's presidency and trying to protect it in advance, indemnified the president for anything, from even investigation, or anything remotely related to the broadest possible interpretation of his official duties. So where does that leave us with the personal mixing with the political in ways that are very financially, in ways that are very familiar in Gulf countries and some other countries in the post-colonial world, but that are, haven't been seen in the United States since the emolument clause was put in, after diplomats started getting jewel-encrusted boxes when, I think it was even before the Constitution, during the Articles of Confederation, that they were being bribed, in effect, when they presented their credentials, and the emolument clause was put in, and now it's sort of gone. And, I just thought you might want to address this remarkable development.
Sure.
But we can't leave it on.
No, you're right. I think you're absolutely right. The emoluments clause has now become like the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. It is basically null and void.
Yeah.
If a president can accept a $400 million airplane,
Sure,
from a foreign potentate, right? This is the word potentate, I believe, is in the emoluments clause of the Constitution, and with the promise that it will then go to a private concern that's associated with him at the end of his presidency. Yeah, the emoluments clause is basically a dead letter. It's a dead letter.
Kaduk, as Yasser Arafat would say.
There we go. Yasser Arafat, famous French philosopher. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that this mixing of private business and public business is, as you said, it's something that Gulf states have no problems with. I mean, back in the first Trump term, when he would send his son-in-law, when he said Jared Kushner to the Gulf, in my imagination, the Gulf government saying, finally, an American government we understand. He sent us his son-in-law. But actually, this is gonna end at the midterms.
Yeah, that's right. You'll have a Congress that will investigate.
This is gonna end at the midterms, because I think that you're gonna have at least one House of Congress that will push back very, very stringently against this kind of mixing of public and private.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And one hopes that will reestablish some of the norms,
some boundaries,
some of the boundaries. I don't want to be naive about this, but the old system was you cashed in after you left office,
right?
Yeah. And basically, there were no limits on what you could do after you left office in terms of taking money from anybody that you wanted. But now doing it while you're in office just does seem to be not just a difference in degree, but a difference in quality.
Right.
Yeah.
You can get so much more when you're in office. You're so much more valuable.
Sure.
If it's a question of purchasing goodwill, an ex-president is of limited interest,
much less interest,
and especially one with well over 3 years of foreign policy, unilateral power facing him. And there isn't much Congress can do about foreign policy. And the Senate, I don't think is going to change hands in the midterms. And we'll see, maybe.
Right.
Okay, I want to invite questions from the audience in the room and from our viewers through the Q&A function. And I'll start with one on Q&A from Karen House, the excellent Karen House. Thank you for joining us, Karen. Why doesn't Russia buy Saudi uranium instead of why doesn't the U.S., buy Saudi uranium instead of now relying on Russia? Excellent question.
Sure, why not? I'm not sure that the Saudis are at a point yet where they're actually selling.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I think the Saudis are still developing. Ma'aden is the mining company.
Yeah.
And I think that they're still kind of trying to dig the stuff up and get it ready for market. I think that's probably why.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think once that is on the market, we probably will buy it.
Yeah.
Even more enthusiastically than we buy Russian exports, even under Trump.
If we are in the market for uranium, I mean, we haven't had a new nuclear plant built in the United States since since the 1970s.
There's that, and there's also remaining uranium in the United States. We're not out of deposits, so dig baby dig.
Yeah,
I guess. All right, from an anonymous attendee, the Saudi oil economy has always been cyclical, but that won't change. 2026 will hit particularly hard, given Trump's transactional nature do you agree that the agreements penned in his tour don't add up financially? The U.S. Gulf bromance is showmanship, statesmanship 2.0, this anonymous person says. It's an interesting question.
So I think that just like the President Trump's first trip in his first term to Saudi Arabia, as we said at the outset, some of this is real, some of this is notional, and some of this is just exaggerated in terms of the dollar amounts of these deals, right? Memorandums of understanding are not deals, right? They are signals of intention that maybe down the line we'll make a deal.
Yeah.
So I do think that when the Saudis, when the Crown Prince said we want to invest $600 billion in the United States, I don't think that was an unreasonable number over a long period.
4 years or 10 years.
4 years, 10 years, including trade, including that's not when the president said, no, I want it to be $1 trillion.
Yeah.
$1 trillion is 100% of Saudi GDP, basically.
Exactly.
That's I just don't think it's going to happen. So the Saudis, the Saudis understand that oil at $60 a barrel is not oil at $85 or $90 a barrel. We've already seen efforts to scale back or extend the time frame of the giga projects, right, which are kind of the most well-known elements of Vision 2030, right? NEOM, what NEOM was going to be, and the plan for NEOM now is different, and the line. And we also see, I think, efforts to cut, to restrain budgets in Saudi Arabia on a number of fronts. And so there's an understanding that that the Saudis have to live within their means. Now, we should also note that Saudi debt to GDP ratio is at about 33% in there. In the past, in the 1980s, it had gotten up to 100% of GDP. The Saudis still have a fair amount of space to go into the debt markets. Now, you don't want to go into the debt markets now at 4 or 5 or 6%, whereas going into the debt markets at 2.5%, the way it was before COVID, was a very practical thing. But the Saudis are in a much better fiscal shape than, say, the United States of America, right? Where we're already seeing effects in the bond market of the prospect of extended tax cuts and extended growth in American deficits. So I don't worry so much about a fiscal crisis in Saudi Arabia in the short term. I think that the Saudis have the resources to sustain what they need to sustain in terms of their government and the operation of their government and the maintenance of what is what should we say, a changing social contract, right, between the Saudi government and the citizenry. I'm not too worried that even at $60 a barrel, that in the short term we're going to see a fiscal crisis in Saudi Arabia.
So Sean Reardon, by the way, if you want to ask a question in the room, just raise your hand. Okay, we've got one over there. I'll come to you next, sir. And anybody else, just signal to me. I'll keep a list, and we still have a few minutes. Sean Reardon asks, why have we, us, been so quiet about the strategic shift expressed in the Saudi speech, in Trump's big speech in Riyadh? Trump was clear on the intent to move away from an interventionist to a collaborative approach, but no one addressed it as a major surprise. The Arab strategic enthusiasm for the Syrian sanction relief and its potential to move the Israelis on Gaza is hard to underestimate. I'm not sure about that. Why do we gloss over all of this? Great comments on conflicts of interest, etc.
Okay.
So
no,
go for it.
This is a good point. I think the reason that I didn't lead with that is that we're talking about surprises, and that didn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that President Trump, I think, in a very direct way, and this was the high politics of the speech. Right. He said that past American efforts to reshape the Middle East through military power and pressure for domestic political reform were failures. Yeah. but we knew he thought that,
Yeah. he's
right?
been
We
saying it for a
we
decade.
knew he thought that. And I think that we also knew that in the post-Iraq war period in American politics, there is very little appetite for the kind of robust, if you will, neoconservative efforts to use the combined power of American military, American economic, and American, if you will, and I'm leery of the term, but everybody knows kind of what it means now, soft power.
Yeah.
The combination of those three to affect radical change in the politics of Middle Eastern countries or countries anywhere in the world, right? The last gasp of this was during the Arab Spring, when the Obama administration, agreed to participate in this intervention in Libya.
Yeah.
And the lessons, as we know, that Obama himself personally took from that, he basically said this was the worst decision of my presidency.
Yeah.
Right. And so it seems to me that the rejection of an interventionist policy aimed at changing the domestic politics of these countries is perfectly in keeping with where American politics have been going.
Yeah.
President Trump just stated it in a very bold-faced way.
Sure.
Now, there are nuances in this, obviously. Even within the context of no more Iraqs, right? You still found plenty of people, both on the right and the left, who were willing to kind of jawbone on democracy issues, right? To say, you should do this, you country in the Middle East should do this, and we should withhold arms sales, or we should withhold aid if you don't do the following things on human rights and democracy promotion.
He's
right?
against.
And he's against that. He's against that, and that is a bit of a change, but I think it's A, not a surprise.
Right.
B, pretty much in keeping, despite the rhetoric, with the way every American president has dealt with the Gulf states.
That's right.
Right? I mean, a little bit of pressure in the George W. Bush administration, post 9/11, on Saudi Arabia to have elections, and the Saudis did, right? They had local elections to try to, and the only reason they did that was try to appease the Americans, right? So that's off the table. But really, there hasn't been significant pressure from the United States, specifically on the Gulf monarchies, for domestic political change.
Let me agree with you on this by pointing out that Joe Biden sort of promised to do that on the campaign trail. Then he makes Saudi Arabia a pariah, and he's beating his chest and all that, and he sounded like Senate Democrats. Some Senate Democrats
Of which he was for years and years.
Of which he was, absolutely. And as soon as he took the oath of office, he had to start moving away from that. And he ended up with the fist bump with MBS in Jeddah. And that was pretty.
And ended up trying to negotiate a defense treaty with Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
So he did a 180.
Right. But he had to. And that was no surprise. So it was humbug of the first order on the campaign trail. So the reason we're not getting into it is that it's been transferable U.S. policy for decades to either not jawbone them on this stuff or jawbone them a bit as president, but not really do anything to effectuate it. And the jawboning is mainly in campaigns.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just not a big deal.
For our listeners in the Arab world, it's kalam fadi.
Exactly. Kalam fadi is yeah. So you have a question, sir.
Yeah, Larry Rubin, Georgia Tech.
Right.
Question is kind of, they're two related to one, but one, in terms of if we see the outcome of these deals or pledges, to what extent do you think, I guess, investors in Saudi Arabia may have toned down whatever their pledges may have been, given the economic chaos at various times over the last few months that have existed and continue to exist? And the second one is also, do you think there's any element, because this is a Gulf tour, of, okay, I'm going to do better than my neighbors type of thing, I'm going to, in terms of numbers, arms sales and so forth, that had any bearing on either the pledges or the deals? Because we often say they pledges, they may not be signed deals in this way. So.
More hockey fun.
Right.
Yeah. So investors, I think, sure, there's been economic instability in the United States. Uncertainty might be an even better term.
Yeah.
Right. Uncertainty about what the regulatory and legal framework for you to do business in the United States if you want to then export from the United States to other places, right? And this is a major issue. But my question is always, where else are you going to do business, right? Do you want to invest a lot in China, where the currency issue is opaque, where your legal rights are questionable? Obviously, Saudi Aramco has invested in China, but I think that they've done it in a way that is state to state with some guarantees.
Yeah.
Investors will find other places to invest, but the United States economy is still a place that it will be really difficult for these big sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf states to avoid if they want to get a decent return on investment.
And
so
why would they want to avoid it?
Right. Okay. And then the Gulf states rivalries among themselves. Oh yeah. Right. I mean, of course, you want to be we're all sons, but you want to be the favorite son, right, of dad. And so I think that a lot of the pomp and circumstance has to do with you love us all, but you love me best, right?
Yeah. There is a patrimonialism in Trump's foreign policy as well as his domestic approach, and he's just he's big dad always, and that you can't think any other way. I think in his business also, he didn't report to a board of directors. That was a private family business, so that's how he works, how he rolls. All right, so
we have one other here.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Last question from the room and the outside. I'll ask a closing question after that. Go ahead.
Elon Wanglas.
Thank you, Elon.
Quick question. Could you just speculate a bit or a bit further on what you think Qatar specifically wants from Trump with their $400 million, essentially a bribe? Because that's not kalam faria, that's not empty words.
Right.
No,
that's real stuff.
That's real.
That's real stuff.
Oh yeah.
You don't give $400 million expecting.
Nothing.
I think they want top cover.
Right.
I think they want top cover. The Qataris are exposed in American politics right now
Because
of October 7th, because of the role that they have played in the funding of Hamas, in the funding of Islamist organizations more generally.
Yeah.
The Qataris, of course, will come back and say, but you wanted us to, right? You wanted us to fund Hamas. We did it in cooperation with the Israelis because you didn't want the Iranians to be funding Hamas.
Right.
This is true, but to some extent irrelevant in the debates that are coming about Qatar. And I think that just one anecdote to exemplify this: my university, Texas A&M, had a campus in Education City in Qatar, and in many ways the most successful of the Education City campuses, because we had petroleum engineering. We were the petroleum engineering school in Education City. We were the only, well, brag a little bit on I'm going to brag and then condemn my institution. We were the only college in Education City, the majority of whose students were actually Qataris.
Yeah.
Okay. We closed that down like that after October 7th because, and this is my speculation, but I would bet my house that it's right. The governor who wants to run for president in 2028, when he found out that a state university in Texas was receiving money from Qatar, he told his appointees, and he had all the appointees on our Board of Regents, to shut that down. And in the next meeting of the Board of Regents, even though this issue was not on the agenda, it was put on the agenda at the last minute, was voted, and we're closing down Texas A&M Qatar. And that's completely because of the expected domestic political fallout from Qatar's financial support for Hamas. I think that the airplane, the pomp and circumstance, the deals,
the golf resort,
the very public, we're helping you by mediating with Hamas, is all about top cover.
Yep.
When Congress starts coming after cover.
Yep.
That's the.
Couldn't agree with you more. I have the privilege, as moderator, asking the last question. We're just about out of time, but take your time in answering this as much or as little as you want. It's hard to see around corners, but you know, a few years away, there'll be another president. He's not eligible for another term, no matter what fantasies he may have. So there will be another president in 4 years' time. What will the next president, whoever it might be, inherit from Trump regarding U.S. Gulf relations?
I think, interestingly enough, a status quo that's actually not that different from what Trump inherited from Biden.
And Biden inherited from Trump.
And Biden inherited from Trump, and Trump inherited it from Obama, and so on and so on, back to George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton.
Right.
The course of U.S. Gulf relations was kind of set by the Gulf War of 1990-91.
Yep.
And that was the introduction of a major American military commitment in the region. 9/11 just strengthened that commitment. The Iraq War, which most Gulf countries except the Kuwaitis thought was a big mistake, and I thought was a big mistake.
It was a big mistake.
And was a big mistake. Further cemented the centrality of the Gulf in American military plans. Every president since President Obama said, we're going to reduce the American presence in the region, and none of them have. The only one who has was Joe Biden in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And he paid a heavy political price for that, right? So I think that what the next president will inherit is a relationship with the Gulf countries that is remarkably close, but not that different, somewhat more tied in economically if this AI stuff takes off.
Yeah.
Right? If there is a real partnership between American AI, Gulf AI,
especially
Gulf cheap energy.
Yeah.
Right? Because the energy demands,
Okay.
I don't know much about AI, but the energy demand
it's vast
to operate, right, a serious AI firm are enormous.
Right.
And it seems to me that might be the thing that will change the most, and it will be the new oil.
The golden triangle.
It will be the new oil, right? That could further link the Gulf states and the United States.
UAE is all in on AI. They've made it the centerpiece of their national strategy, both domestic and foreign, and they are betting big on AI.
And the Saudis talk about it too.
They talk about it too. UAE.
I mean, Saudis don't like it when you say this, but if you want to know what the Saudis are going to do, look at what the UAE did 3 years ago.
Generally speaking,
and the Saudis are better positioned in many ways to dominate the Gulf market on AI because of their vast energy resources and their vast territory. But I do think that there'll be some competition among the Gulf states. But my guess is also that there'll be plenty to go around.
UAE has nimbleness because it's not held down by a complex domestic political scene, which Saudi has, an Arab leadership regional role, and in a global Islamic leadership role. It can just do what it wants in a much more Silicon Valley way of moving fast and breaking things.
And has more ready cash.
Yeah, that too.
Not in total, but cash that it can throw at stuff.
That's right. Dr. F. Gregory Gause, what a great source of insight and information. We were counting on you to give us, a kind of a brilliant roadmap of what happened, and you did. So please join me in thanking Dr. Gause for a remarkable. Thank you.